Hey guys, Super Retrocade here. So, something I want to talk about today was I've started collecting games more. It's been kind of this crazy thing where at first I was trying to collect like the top 100 Super Nintendo games, but then I started running into games that are kind of overpriced that I didn't really care enough about. So then I kind of pared it down to like games that I had or my friends had in my childhood, or just games I really love today. Well, what I'm doing now is I'm starting to get into Nintendo 64 collecting, because I pretty much have all the Super Nintendo games I want at this point. So kind of what I wanted to show today was how I go through cleaning them up. So, like, this is a copy of NBA Hang Time that I bought. So typically what I do is I go on eBay and I try to find a good price on a game that has good labels, and I try to get it so that there's not a whole lot of dings on the cartridge, or like if there is stuff on the cartridge, can I get it off with isopropyl alcohol? So the first thing that I usually do is, let me grab it real quick, is I'll get like, I'll just take a thing of paper towels and I'll take some isopropyl alcohol, and this is super cheap. I'll just get like a big thing of isopropyl alcohol, and I'll just kind of douse this, and I'll just kind of go around the cartridge trying to avoid the labels, because from my experience it doesn't really do anything to the labels. I think there's enough of a gloss on the labels to make it not really a big deal if you get some on it. But I just kind of go around the cartridge and try to get all the junk off. And then immediately I'll go and I'll take the dry part of the paper towel and kind of clean it. And I like to do that when I first get them too, just to get whatever germs and stuff off. And then what I like to do is I'll open them up, and it looks like I forgot my game bit, so I'm gonna go grab my game bit screwdriver. So for Nintendo cartridges, you need a special kind of screwdriver called a game bit, because a lot of Nintendo and Genesis stuff will have this proprietary bit on them. Let me turn on my soldering iron here for a little later. So then I'll just undo these game bit screws. And one of the things I've noticed with Nintendo 64 games is it's actually pretty tough to get ones that have real clean shells, because a lot of these games are multiplayer, so they were like pretty popular and they'd be, rented and put in the systems a lot. So that's been kind of interesting. So then on the inside here, you see with Nintendo 64 games, they do this like they put this other metal shell in here, and I don't know if it's like to block out noise, or as far as like the circuit board picking up electrostatic noise, or if it's just to make it more robust. I don't know. So it looks like I'm gonna need another little screwdriver, so I'll go grab that. So this is just a really small Phillips, Craftsman Professional. It's a little bigger than you'd use for like a pair of glasses or something. I'm just going to take these screws off. Then this guy comes off. Then there's just a little holder in here. This one's actually kind of warped, which is a little weird. It's a little bent. I don't know if you guys can see that. Yeah, it's a little bent. They're not usually like that. So then on the board itself, it has one capacitor here. So let me look. This capacitor is a 6.3 volt 22 microfarad capacitor. So what I've been doing, this is for both Super Nintendo and Nintendo 64. If you go to console5.com, they have you can buy individual capacitors for redoing these cartridges. In the Super Nintendo cartridges I've done, they have two different sized capacitors. And then so far in Nintendo 64, I've only found these 6.3 volt 22 microfarad caps. So what they sell on Console 5 is they sell these replacement capacitors that are high quality, but they're rated a little differently. They're rated, it's okay to replace the capacitors with one that's rated for more voltage, but not for more capacitance. You want to make sure the capacitance matches what you're replacing. And then for the voltage, it can be higher, but you typically don't want to go much higher for the voltage just because the size of the capacitor will be different if you get a much higher voltage capacitor. So on console5.com, they sell 10 volt 22 microfarad capacitors. So that's what I end up replacing these with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my soldering iron here, and I'm just going to put the PCB on this little stand. And I always try to figure out the polarity before I do it, even though on Nintendo cartridges it's always marked on the board, which is pretty nice. But I always try to remember, like, I'll just remember negative leg goes towards the chip, because on these capacitors they have a white stripe down them, and that means it's the negative pole. So so on this one, I'm just going to remember negative goes towards the chip. Another thing you'll notice is on brand new capacitors, the negative leg is always shorter. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to desolder this capacitor so that I can replace it with the new one. So I'm going to take a little bit of flux here. And this is that MG Chemical No Clean Flux. And I'm just going to put it on the points where the capacitors are. And then I'm going to take a little bit of solder, and I'm going to add solder to those 2 points just to make the old solder easier to remove. And this is going to put off some of these fumes. So I have a box fan pointed at me, and I have my sliding door open. It might be messing with the audio a little bit, but it makes it so you don't inhale all these fumes. And then I'm just going to go across the 2 points here and pull the cap up, pull the capacitor out. There we go. So there's the old capacitor. I'm going to throw that away. That's probably 20 years old at this point. And then I don't have a desoldering tool, or I don't have a desoldering pump. I just have this little hand one. So I'm just gonna heat up the ball and then back off a little bit and suck up the solder. So there, I got both the legs. That's something that just takes a lot of practice. You're not going to be great at that right away. And then I take the new capacitor. I'm going to put it in there with the same polarity, the negative side towards the chip. And then I'm just going to solder this one in, which should be easy because I already have flux on the points. Oh. So now these legs are in here good. Then I'm just going to bend this over like that. Then I'm going to cut the two legs. I'm going to do that over the garbage here. So then at this point, you have a recapped board, and that's really the only thing to really do to this board since it doesn't have a battery or anything. Yeah, this is NBA hang time here for Nintendo 64. But then you can't really, I don't know if you can really tell on camera, but these contacts are kind of oxidized and dirty. So I watched a video recently on YouTube where they were saying that the thing to do is get one of these fiberglass pens. And what these fiberglass pens are traditionally for is like on these PCBs, they have the traces that are underneath or that are often inside the circuit board, and then they have a veneer on them, like a polish on the board. And if you wanted to solder to like one of these traces that are in the board, you'd take a fiberglass pen and you'd scrape on the PCB until you expose the actual metal inside the board to solder to it. But what I'm going to do with this pen instead is these contacts are made of what's called hard gold. So they're actually very, very strong and made to last by, you know, inserting and ejecting out of consoles. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take this fiberglass pen and I'm going to go over these contacts, but I'm going to do it very lightly because I don't want to mess up the contacts, and I'm going to make sure to stay on the contacts and not dwelling on any of them too long. You just kind of want to do it pretty lightly. And what this is going to do is this is going to get a lot of the impurities and dust and stuff off of it. You're just kind of like scraping the surface of them. So I'm going to go through every one. And it's not such a major thing on Nintendo 64, I don't believe, because I don't think Nintendo 64 was really plagued by not being able to read games. But I know like Super Nintendo and NES, it's a big thing. Except NES, it's more how they design the cartridge slot than it is the actual games themselves. So if you're having this problem on an NES, I would look for a mod like the Blinky Light Win or getting a top loader NES more than I would go after your cartridges. And it's actually kind of cool doing this because you can't really see it on camera, but I can actually see the junk coming off of it and actually flying off of it into the air. So that's probably another good reason to be in a well-ventilated room. So I'm just going down every contact. And you can even tell the contacts look so much better. So I'm just going to go through every one, and I haven't really decided whether or not I'm going to go back and do this to all my cartridges. because I just saw this in a YouTube video where they were showing how they restore these games. So then after you're done doing that, what I'll do is I'll take a little bit of isopropyl alcohol and I'll just put it on a Q-tip. So now I've got a Q-tip of isopropyl alcohol, and then I'll just go across these contacts. And you can tell by how dirty the Q-tip will get that you are doing something. Then I'll take the back side of the Q-tip and I'll dry it. And then I'm going to get another Q-tip and do the other side. And then even though it's no clean, I'll still get that flux off the circuit board. And then at this point, you just reassemble your cartridge. See if I can remember how this went here. And I think I was doing it backwards. Yep. Yeah, it was fighting me too much to be right. Okay, so we got that. There we go. Then we'll put our back on it. Then we take our game bit and we just, whoop, we retighten our screws. Typically don't want to drop them on the floor. Oh, actually I missed a couple screws. Oh yeah, I missed a step here. So you gotta put this back on to shield it again. And this takes those little Phillips screws. There we go. Put the back on. Then let me find the one that went under the couch. There we go. Drop that one back in there. And now we have an NBA Hang Time for Nintendo 64 that looks very clean, has good labels, has shiny contacts that should work well, and it's got a new capacitor in it. So that's how I go about restoring these games. And I've been doing the same thing with Super Nintendo. The only thing I've noticed with Super Nintendo is there's two different size capacitors, and both of those sizes can be bought on console5.com. And a lot of Super Nintendo games have a battery in them, and those batteries can be purchased from console5.com. And if you buy them from console5.com versus eBay, they're easier to install because they put the legs, they manufacture the legs in a certain way that makes them easier to get into the PCB of the Super Nintendo cartridges. And yeah, it's pretty much the same thing for Super Nintendo. And Super Nintendo, I've run into a lot more games that don't play consistently, and that's where using that fiberglass pen and the isopropyl alcohol to clean the contacts really helps. So I hope you find this video interesting. This is Super Retrocade, and thanks for watching.